In this module, we're going to take a look at global stratification and population dynamics. Your book will go into much more depth regarding some of the theories here, but this will provide a good overview. First, let's start with looking at the world's population and how it has changed over the last several hundred years. As you look at the map, the chart here, you see from the year 1700 up until about the projection for 2048. The world's population has grown significantly in the last several hundred years. As you can see here, there has been a large spike after the 1900s and as we approach the 21st century, growing quickly from 3 billion to 6 billion to 8 billion and projected to be over 9 billion in 2048. There are a number of factors that have led to this, and certainly the book as well as this lecture will go into a little bit of that, but overall advancements in healthcare, the knowledge and ability to vaccinate against certain diseases, and the ability to rapidly disseminate information to people about healthcare has really increased the ability for the world to grow quickly and sustain life much longer. But the world wasn't always growing at this rate. If you look at a much more extended, longer look back, you can see that the population growth is even more spiked than the previous chart. Here you start to look back, and if you look at 1 AD up until the projection in 2050, you start to see how pronounced that spike is and just how concerning population growth actually can be. As you know, the planet itself has not grown larger. This means that many more people are living on the planet and trying to share a very, very small number of scarce resources. Here are some of the factors that we look at when we talk about the terms of population. Accrued birth rate. That's looking at how many people are being born in any given population. It's one way to compare across countries and say, oh, this country has a much higher rate of birth, this one has a much lower one. Obviously, with lower rates of birth, that typically will curtail your population growth and make it slow down. It is always measured as the number of births per 1,000 in the population. The next one is the average total fertility rate. It's simply the average number of children born to a woman over her lifetime. Apologies for the typo there. From there, you also get the accrued death rate. The accrued death rate, much like the accrued birth rate, is the number of deaths per 1,000 in the population. This helps you to determine how quickly are people dying off and if there is a difference from country to country or population to population. Finally, infant mortality rates can be very interesting to look at for third world or developing countries. These are the number of children who die within the first year per 1,000 live births. Why this becomes critical is that people will then be looking at how many children are actually able to be born and often will reproduce more children to offset for this. It's a very interesting dynamic to look at within population and one that often is tied very much to the growth of that population or the shrinking of a particular population. Two key factors that we also look at of how long people are going to live is life expectancy. That's the number of years the average person in that particular population is expected to live. Here in the US, the average population is expected to currently live 78.86 years. This has steadily been going up for the last several decades, again because of advancements in healthcare and a number of other factors, like getting out communication to the population after the 1950s around starting to stop smoking. Now, life expectancy is interesting because it's the average number you're expected to live, but that's not the longest the human body could potentially sustain life. That's what we call lifespan. Lifespan is the theoretical number of years a human body could actually sustain life, under ideal conditions. This is if everything was going right, you didn't run into any major diseases or any debilitating things, you could actually, with the human body today, live between 115 and 122 years. At the time of this presentation, 122 years was the longest documented person to have lived, though most scientists agree that the actual lifespan is relatively close to about 115 years, that the 122 is certainly an exception. So your book will talk a lot more about different population theories, but Malthus is one of the ones that comes up frequently and is most noted on population. Malthus said that the population is going to grow exponentially. Just think about kind of 10 by 10 by 10, and it just keeps multiplying faster and faster. And as we looked at that first chart, that is very much how the population has grown over the last several hundred years. What he then says is that the food supply will only grow arithmetically, meaning it will grow 1 plus 1 plus 1, never multiplying, never exponentially growing. Now, there's some interesting theories about if he's right, if he's wrong, but he says that this will lead to conflict and a struggle for existence, that this struggle for food, because there's not enough of it and yet the demand is so high, will essentially lead to the downfall of many societies. Why people think he's a little bit wrong. This is an actual chart of cereal yields from the World Resources Institute showing from the 1960s to 2011. Even in places like Latin America, the developing world in Asia, and other developing countries, slightly lagging in sub-Saharan Africa, they've made great progress actually producing food exponentially to match the population growth. World fish population, for example, also you see that we have been making more fish in order to meet some of the demand and supply. And again, this is through a number of scientific means, and not trying to say whether those are right or wrong, but definitely challenges a bit of Malthus's thinking that we would have this problem where we'd run out of food. He believed the population in his mind had natural ways of correcting it instead of artificial or scientific ways. He saw these as what he called positive and preventative checks. Positive checks being events that limit reproduction by causing the death of individuals before they're ever of reproductive age, or by causing the deaths of large numbers of people, thereby lowering the overall population. Think of like a war where thousands of people die. He'd consider that a positive check. Now, positive sounds like it's got a very good connotation or tone to it. Doesn't mean that at all. He sees it as positive because it's keeping the population in check. And if the objective is to keep the population in check, it's positive. He then says that there's preventative checks such as practices. This is things like using contraception, maybe delaying your marriage. So in societies where it's much more strongly felt that you do not have sex before marriage, if you delay the age of marriage, it also typically will delay childbearing. And also taking vows of celibacy. So if they notice the population is growing too quickly, asking people not to have sex. Now, shifting gears a bit, one of the major factors that we look at in population still today is HIV and AIDS. And while sub-Saharan Africa continues to lead as the region with the highest percentage of persons in the world living with HIV and AIDS is still a big concern here in California, LA County, and even Santa Clarita. Other sexually transmitted diseases pose many more risks also, and are also increasing at alarming numbers. So in LA County, and they report a few years back, so while it is 2017 at the time of this recording, we certainly look, and the latest surveillance report available is 2014. They had a total number of 3,841 cases of syphilis reported in LA County in that year. And that is increasing 52% for males, 14% for females, and this is not just among gay populations, this is among heterosexual populations as well. And a total of 14,555 cases of gonorrhea were reported. The majority, 75%, occurring in persons aged 15 to 34, and this is all again in LA County. That's a 51% increase from 2010 to 2014. So while we think about HIV and AIDS being a problem of the past or something associated with gay populations or maybe Africa, it simply is not the case. And in fact, more so now, sexually transmitted diseases such as these are reoccurring in numbers we haven't seen in decades. So the concern with this is that it jeopardizes one's immune system. It can also open you up to then other other diseases that are susceptible to when your immune system is jeopardized. So just keep that in mind. So we talked a lot about population, some of the key terms, the ways in which Malthus thought about population, and we've also touched on HIV and AIDS a bit as well. Hopefully this gives you a bit of an overview, but again, review your text and make sure that you're fully up to speed on everything that has to do with population dynamics.